So opposition peers voted last night against a range of measures in the police, crime, sentencing and courts bill. Another reason this is complicated for me is while I'm talking about people power today, I don't really fundamentally agree with the House of Lords. They're unelected people voting on our laws.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
And
on
there's
the other
hundreds
hand,
of them.
Sometimes they do us a big favour like last night. So I want to celebrate what they did while also saying I'm actually a little bit on the fence about the House of Lords. I don't think it's fundamentally democratic.
It's definitely
to have
not democratic.
unelected peers.
And especially not to have it packed full of people who otherwise by representation in the elected chamber are way overrepresented, i.e. the Lib Dems, because Nick Clegg put loads of them in there when he was in the government. And they have a far bigger overrepresentation in the Lords than they do in the Commons.
There's no good way to have a group of unelected people. They should all be elected.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Second chamber, definitely elected, like America.
On the other hand, you know, they have dealt very nicely with a bill that Amnesty called an assault on our freedoms.
Well, that means it must be the right thing to do if Amnesty are calling it an assault on our freedoms.
All right, we are as one on Amnesty, but I think they really did call this right. Now, Baroness Williams did defend the bill, saying that the powers would only be used when necessary and where reasonable. But who would have got to define that? Well, the Secretary of State would have done, or the police. It put far too much discretion and power in their hands.
But isn't that the way it is already, though? Because the police, as you were saying, react very differently depending on who's demonstrating. And so surely the police operational people are the ones that make that decision on the day.
Yeah, but it would have been worse because what it would have... it included a term, serious disruption to the life of the community. Well, how do you define serious disruption? It wasn't defined. And I don't think something like that should be at the discretion of a politician or police. It should be defined very clearly in laws. So some of the key wins last night for the House of Lords, the peers voted against locking on. I expect this is something that you probably would have liked them to vote for.
Yes.
So that's locking yourself to things to obstruct.
I mean, it seems to me that if you've locked yourself to something or padlocked yourself to something, the police are perfectly within their rights to get some kind of angle grinder and just go and just unhook you. No? Why can't they do that?
I'm not clear on what their exact powers are right now, but it would have made it illegal to even do so, to even lock on in the first place.
Sorry about the sparks. You know.
You are mean.
I'm not. If you want to glue your hands to something, that is quite a dangerous thing to do. And my belief is you should just pull their hands off.
Well, it is quite mental. And I have to say, part of me has been a little bit suspicious about how much Insulate Britain's activities have been amplified by the media. Was there any sense of amplifying their barking mad irritatingness in order to help push this bill through? I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, it hasn't worked.
I think the problem is that we're dealing with a bunch of people who have used in the past methods which we seemingly are foxed by and that the police don't seem to know how to deal with, right? And therefore we've ended up with situations where individual motorists have had to drag them out of the way because the police won't do it. And if you're in that kind of anarchistic world, then the rules are clearly not working.
Yeah.
So whatever you might say about the police's powers, they're not doing the right thing.
But one thing is the police, you know, I'm sure we saw similar footage of the police standing there explaining very kindly in a very measured way to Insulate Britain and also to Extinction Rebellion about how they would be policing them and, you know, trying to gently lead them out of the way. That is not what I saw at anti-lockdown protests, for instance. So there's a kind of moral licence we grant a certain sort of protester. So people that protest about climate, for instance, that's considered morally acceptable
why
and virtuous.
Why?
Well, partly because we are so censorious about everything that we never have the other side of the
nonsense
debate.
But it is the most important thing. I mean, I heard Peter Hain this morning banging on about it, saying, you know, well, of course, the reason why this is like the suffragettes is because it's such an important issue. Well, really?
No, it's not.
It really isn't.
It's because we've stifled the other side of the debate. And so I would say that we need more debate and more protest, not less.
But we need less protest of the kind that they practice. But I'm going to stop you for a second because we're just going to take a little break and we will be back with more. Isn't this a very reasoned and sensible argument? This is why we hate women, because they're always telling us we're wrong.
Right, that's a hate crime. We'll
that
come
was
on to
just
that.
a joke, by the way.
But another thing that got voted out, which is great, was the police would have been able to stop and search people on suspicion, well, even without suspicion at protests, or they would be able to stop people and vehicles if they thought they planned to cause serious disruption. I don't think the police should be able to stop people on suspicion they might cause serious disruption when serious disruption is not defined. That basically gives them the power to stop and search everybody.
But they kind of have that now, don't they? I mean, they can pull you over in a car for any reason. If you're driving in a way which is completely normal and you haven't broken any rules, you can still be pulled over by the cops if they wish to pull you over.
Well, then they don't need any more of that power, do they?
Possibly not.
No. The peers also voted for amendments to the bill, which was to get rid of the conditions on noisy protests.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is good. Now, we don't all enjoy lots of noisy protests, do we? In fact, I've been at protests that I believe in, and I find the noise very irritating myself. I don't enjoy it, but this is part of the point of the protest.
I think this one was just aimed at
disruptive.
Steve Bray, wasn't it? I mean, it was basically just aimed at Steve Bray because he makes a nuisance of himself, and he's a most odious character. He really is. But unfortunately, in a democracy, you have to live with that.
We have to tolerate the odious characters.
I mean, I would just come up with a different way of dealing with it, like I throw a bucket of custard over him or something.
As long as that's legal.
Well, it's not illegal, is it, to throw custard over anyone? They used to do it on television every Saturday morning.
Stop with your custard red herrings.
All right.
But
it's a great idea, though.
The example that came up was, and this is kind of funny because this is what the government do. They want to piggyback on something they think will generate public outrage. And they said, what if there was an anti-vax protest outside a school that was noisy? Well, we don't really have a big problem with noisy anti-vax protests outside a school, but we also have to permit protests to be noisy. It's important, otherwise you could potentially get rid of every protest.
Again, how do you define noisy?
It's undefined, which is dangerous, and all of those things lead to too much power to the Secretary of State, and elements of being in a police state. So also protecting the right for people to hold protests in Parliament Square. I think that's important. That's exactly the place that protests should be, and should be under their noses.
That takes us back to insulate Britain. If they want to protest, let them protest there, not on the M25, not on the North Circular, not in front of a train, and make it so that they're not disrupting people. And that's my point, really. I mean, I've got no problem with people protesting. I just think that protesting has to be not about disrupting and not about making people's lives a misery and stopping ambulances from getting to hospitals.
That was so... They really didn't do themselves any PR favours then, did they?
No, they really didn't.
So... Altogether, well done, House of Lords. If you must be there, at least you proved your worth your salt last night. So that was good. But then they have voted to make misogyny a hate crime.
Right. Yeah, I struggled to work out what this one's about. In England and Wales.
Well, it means...
So does that mean you're all right in Scotland then, or is it already a hate crime there?
Oh, I think it might already be a hate crime. You're losing me. I'm not quite sure. I think it might. I mean, Scotland's like further ahead with everything like that, isn't it?
Well, when you say ahead, I mean, I would challenge you.
The courts now have the power to treat misogyny as an aggravating factor, and they can adjust sentences accordingly. This, for me, is another quite tricky one, I have to say.
The people who are for it say you already have racial aggravation going on. You already have homophobic legislation, so why not have misogynistic? And you can see the logic there, but then that's why the other two are also possibly questionable, because surely the offence is the offence. It's not who the victim of the offence is.
Well, I think I agree with you. The thing is, there are millions of crimes committed against women every year. Is it important to establish if they are rooted in hostility and hatred towards women?
Yeah.
Well, possibly. But the problem with defining a hate crime is it's based on subjective perception, not on the crime itself. Like you say, a crime is a crime.
Yes.
Does it matter what the emotion was behind it?
And should you be punished more for committing a crime against a particular individual rather than another particular individual? I think that's wrong in law, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not really comfortable with this. Part of me thinks, well, if all these other things are hate crime, why would misogyny not be a hate crime? But I don't think it's going to fix a problem where there is a culture still of hostility towards women. I don't think it's going to fix the problem.
No.
In fact, I think it's got the possibility to make it worse.
Indeed.
Because it comes down to subjective perception. So, there's been discussion about is wolf whistling misogyny? Well, this is an example where misogyny is completely overused and totally diluted.
Yeah.
It may be irritating. You may not welcome it. I've been that young girl that didn't like it.
No.
But it's not hatred of women to do so. And so there's
a
real danger of diluting all this
down. I would
down.
never have wolf whistled at a woman, and wouldn't ever want anybody that I was with to do it. So I would consider it to be bad manners apart from anything else.
Yes, but it's not misogyny, and perhaps that could be dealt with instead by having a different range of offences for public harassment. Whether wolf whistling counts as public harassment or not, I don't know. So I'm worried about the subjectivity of something being a hate crime. I'm not sure it tackles a culture of misogyny.
Also, do you want the police van sort of screeching to a halt, 10 police jump out and start arresting people on a building site for whistling at a woman, when down the road there's a load of people, glued to the M25 and they can't arrest them because, they won't hurt them?
I'm not convinced they'll do that anyway. And is this really how you change a culture of sexism or hostility to women? I'm not sure. The other danger is that you get non-crime hate incidents, like Harry Miller recently.
But they've all been done away with, haven't they? Hasn't that all come to a swift end?
The police college is having to review its guidance about it, which is great. But, there we had this crazy incident where somebody drafted what were reported to be transphobic limericks. Maybe he didn't draft them, he shared them on Twitter, and that was a non-crime hate incident. It's kind of all Orwellian doublespeak. There's no such thing as a non-crime
it's either a crime or it's not.
hate incident.
Right.
Yeah, I also am not really sure whether it's a good idea to widen the scope of what the police are supposed to do. Why should they also not just be dealing with the crime, but assessing what motivated the crime, what emotion was behind the crime? Because I think they've got enough to do. There's enough unsolved burglaries, etc.
Exactly.
Should they also be deciding what pernicious emotions are behind a crime?
I know.
So I think we're kind of as one on misogyny as a hate crime, aren't we? Generally not necessary, but I get it. Millions of crimes are committed against women, and some of those are rooted in misogyny.
But then more crimes are committed against men, and we've had this debate going on for ages. But we have to stop now because we're out of time, unfortunately. In fact, we're over time. So I'm getting.
I'm going to glue myself.
Okay.
To this desk now. There's very little you can do about it in law in protest.
Yeah, but
unfortunately, I think I
unfortunately,
should get longer
you'll
every
have found
week.
yourself gluing yourself to a desk inside of a building which is not a public space, and so therefore we can do whatever we like to get rid of you.